For much of its history, the United States has believed itself to be protected by geography. Vast oceans stretch across the Atlantic and Pacific, acting like natural shields. For generations, Americans felt their homeland was largely insulated from the kinds of devastating attacks that frequently struck other parts of the world. But history has shown that no nation is completely immune. There have been moments when the United States itself became the target, moments that shocked the country and changed the course of history. These attacks did more than cause destruction. They reshaped American policy, transformed global alliances, and altered how the nation viewed its own security. Two of the most shocking examples occurred decades apart, yet both had one thing in common: they came suddenly, unexpectedly, and with enormous consequences. The first would arrive on a quiet Sunday morning in Hawaii. On December 7, 1941, the peaceful harbor at Pearl Harbor became the center of one of the most dramatic surprise attacks in modern history. Just before 8 a.m., waves of aircraft launched by the Imperial Japanese Navy appeared over the island of Oahu. Many American sailors and soldiers were still asleep. Moments later, bombs began to fall. Fighter planes strafed airfields while torpedo bombers targeted battleships anchored in the harbor. Within minutes, the sky filled with smoke and explosions. One of the most devastating moments came when the battleship USS Arizona, BB-39, was struck by a bomb that detonated its ammunition magazine. The resulting explosion destroyed the ship and killed more than 1,000 sailors. By the time the attack ended, more than 2,400 Americans had been killed, and much of the Pacific Fleet had been severely damaged. The shock was immediate and overwhelming. The following day, the President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt, addressed Congress. He described December 7 as a date which will live in infamy. Within hours, the United States declared war on Japan, officially entering World War II. Soon afterward, Japan's allies Germany and Italy also declared war on the United States, transforming a regional conflict into a truly global struggle. The attack on Pearl Harbor awakened a nation. Factories switched to wartime production. Millions of Americans enlisted in the armed forces. The country mobilized on a scale never seen before. Yet decades later, another shocking attack would again remind the world that even the most powerful nation could still be vulnerable. And this time, the threat would come from a very different kind of enemy. After the end of World War II, the United States became one of the most powerful nations in the world. For decades, the greatest threats it faced came from rival countries and geopolitical tensions such as the Cold War. But by the late 20th century, a new kind of threat was emerging. Instead of large armies or powerful navies, this danger came from decentralized groups operating across borders. These groups relied on secrecy, ideology, and unconventional tactics to strike powerful nations where they least expected it. One of the most dangerous among them was Al-Qaeda. Led by Osama bin Laden, the organization believed that attacks against the United States would force it to withdraw its influence from parts of the world. Throughout the 1990s, several attacks linked to the group signaled the growing threat of global terrorism. But few could have imagined the scale of what was about to happen in the early morning hours of September 11, 2001. On the morning of September 11, 2001, 19 hijackers boarded 4 commercial airplanes departing from airports in the United States. Their plan was chillingly simple. Instead of using traditional weapons, the attackers intended to turn the airplanes themselves into missiles. The first plane struck the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City at 8:46 a.m. At first, many people believed it was a tragic accident. But 17 minutes later, a second plane slammed into the South Tower. In that moment, it became clear that the United States was under attack. Television networks across the world began broadcasting live images of the burning towers. Millions of people watched in shock as smoke poured into the sky above Manhattan. Soon afterward, a third plane crashed into the Pentagon, the headquarters of the U.S. Department of Defense. America had not faced such a coordinated attack on its homeland in generations. Meanwhile, a fourth hijacked airplane was heading toward Washington, D.C. The intended target is believed to have been either the United States Capitol or the White House. But the passengers on board United Airlines Flight 93 learned about the earlier attacks through phone calls to their families. Realizing what was happening, they made a decision that would become one of the most remarkable acts of courage in modern history. The passengers fought back against the hijackers. During the struggle, the aircraft crashed into a field near Shanksville. Everyone on board lost their lives, but their actions likely prevented an even greater catastrophe. Within hours, the world would witness scenes of destruction that would be remembered for generations. And the impact of this day would reshape global politics for decades to come. As the fires continued to burn inside the World Trade Center towers, thousands of firefighters, police officers, and emergency workers rushed toward the danger. Their mission was simple but incredibly dangerous: save as many lives as possible. Inside the towers, people were trying desperately to escape. Stairwells filled with smoke as office workers slowly descended dozens of floors. Outside, the streets of New York City were filled with confusion, sirens, and falling debris. Then, less than an hour after the second plane struck, the unimaginable happened. At 9:59 a.m., the South Tower suddenly collapsed. The massive structure, once one of the tallest buildings in the world, crumbled in seconds, sending a giant cloud of dust and debris across lower Manhattan. Just 29 minutes later, the North Tower also collapsed. Millions of people around the world watched the tragedy unfold live on television. It was one of the most shocking moments ever broadcast in modern history. When the attacks finally ended, the scale of the tragedy became clear. Nearly 3,000 people lost their lives in the September 11th attacks. Victims came from more than 90 different countries, showing how global the impact of the attacks truly was. Among the victims were office workers, airline passengers, police officers, and firefighters who had rushed into danger to save others. The attacks also caused massive destruction to buildings and infrastructure across lower Manhattan. The area surrounding the collapsed towers would later become known as Ground Zero. In the months that followed, thousands of rescue workers searched through the rubble, hoping to find survivors. But for many families, the tragedy brought heartbreaking loss. Despite the devastation, acts of courage and unity emerged everywhere, from first responders risking their lives to ordinary citizens helping strangers escape the disaster. The attacks of September 11th quickly became a turning point in modern history. Just days later, the United States government identified Al-Qaeda as the group responsible. President George W. Bush announced that the country would launch a global effort to combat terrorism. This campaign became known as the War on Terror. Soon afterward, U.S. forces began military operations in Afghanistan, where the leaders of Al-Qaeda were believed to be hiding. The attacks also changed everyday life across the world. Airport security became much stricter, intelligence cooperation between countries increased, and governments began developing new strategies to prevent future attacks. But beyond politics and security, the events of that day left a deep emotional mark on millions of people. And even decades later, the memory of those moments continues to shape how the world understands safety, vulnerability, and resilience. While Pearl Harbor attack and the September 11th attacks remain the most widely remembered assaults on the nation, they are not the only times the United States has experienced violence on its own soil. In 1995, a devastating domestic terrorist attack occurred in Oklahoma City. A truck bomb exploded outside the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, killing 168 people, including many children in a daycare center inside the building. The event, known as the Oklahoma City bombing, shocked the country and highlighted the dangers of extremism within national borders. Years later, another tragic attack occurred during the Boston Marathon in 2013. Two bombs exploded near the finish line of the race, killing 3 people and injuring hundreds. The incident became known as the Boston Marathon bombing. These attacks demonstrated that threats can come from both foreign groups and individuals within a nation itself. Each major attack forced the United States to rethink its security strategies. After the tragedy of September 11th attacks, sweeping changes were introduced. One of the most significant was the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, a government agency designed to coordinate national efforts against terrorism. Airport security also changed dramatically with the establishment of the Transportation Security Administration, commonly known as the TSA. Passengers now undergo detailed screening procedures, and strict security measures have become a normal part of international travel. Intelligence agencies increased cooperation with allies around the world, sharing information to detect and prevent potential threats before they occur. These changes have reshaped how modern societies balance security, freedom, and privacy. Today, memorials stand as reminders of the lives lost and the lessons learned. At the site where the Twin Towers once stood, the National September 11 Memorial and Museum honors the nearly 3,000 victims of the attacks. In Hawaii, the USS Arizona Memorial rests above the sunken battleship, preserving the memory of the sailors who died during the attack on Pearl Harbor. These places serve not only as memorials but also as reminders of resilience. History shows that even in the face of devastating attacks, nations and communities have the ability to rebuild and move forward. The story of the United States under attack is therefore not only a story of tragedy. It is also a story of endurance, unity, and the determination to protect future generations from repeating the darkest moments of the past. And as history continues to unfold, the lessons learned from these events remain as important as ever.
Subscribe Info Beyond Borders now for more mind-blowing knowledge.